I would implore everybody who's celebrating the day to remember, it's good to be a humble winner. Remember when I was here 4 years ago? Remember how bad that felt? Remember that half the country right now still feels that way. Please remember that. Remember that for the first time in the history of America, the life expectancy of white people is dropping because of heroin, because of suicide. All these white people out there that feel that anguish, that pain, that mad because they think nobody cares. And maybe they don't. Let me tell you something. I know how that feels. I promise you, I know how that feels. If you're a police officer, and every time you put your uniform on, you feel like you got a target on your back. You're appalled by the ingratitude that people have when you would risk your life to save them. Oh, man, believe me. Believe me. I know how that feels. Everyone knows how that feels. But here's the difference between me and you. You guys hate each other for that. And I don't hate anybody. I just hate that feeling. That's what I fight through. That's what I suggest you fight through.
I resonated with that because what I heard him saying is, in many ways, the experience of African Americans and other oppressed groups. You know, like there's a target on your back, that nobody cares, that people are basically making assumptions about you, that, and I'm paraphrasing the way I heard it. People are making assumptions about you that put you in jeopardy, feeling like, your country has abandoned you.
And what popped out for me is comedians are observers, and he's sort of outside of the system in a way, right? It's like he's in it, but then he's also able to observe it, and I definitely identify with that. And I think he's recognizing that most everybody feels like they're under threat, and what is that threat? Like, what are the common things? And I think part of that is the sense of scarcity and not being able to get by. I mean,
is almost exactly what Black people and other people of color feel. I mean, that's the space we step into together. Now we're coming at it from different places, in terms of how we get to that perception. But the perception is there. And so I ended up asking myself the question, what is happening in our society that creates that perception for almost everybody? Even though these people are different, in different positions and have different points of view, but almost everybody is feeling abandoned, left behind, a target. They feel threatened. They're fearful. And if that's happening for everybody, then the question seems to me, or most Americans, the question seems to me is what's happening in our society that's creating that among us, and how do we interrupt that?
The thing that's the challenge in my mind is that the world is changing so fast, and going back to the way things were from like what enabled working class white people to not feel scarcity isn't what's going to work in the future. Those kinds of jobs just are not, they're going to become more and more scarce. And the tension that I think is playing out, and Pat, you probably will have insights about this, is, you've talked over and over again about how the African American community is very community based, right? Everybody comes together. And in order to survive, it's like everyone, it's a community effort for survival. And that is sort of the antithesis of middle white America's mentality of like, you're kind of on your own. And that is, and this sense of individual liberty. I mean, even like looking at masks, right? It's like, don't tell me what to do. And this, strong sense of liberty and the capacity to determine the outcome of your own life, and yet at the same time feeling under threat and not feeling like maybe I can do enough to survive. And I don't, I'm not quite sure how to interrupt that, because I think, so how do we get to a place where there's different kinds of cooperation that makes it easier for people to sustain themselves?
Yeah, and I actually, I often say in my anti-racism training that as we move to a different way of being, if we move toward a more equitable, just, egalitarian culture, we will have to challenge all of our assumptions about what is enough, our assumptions about success. All of we don't have to throw them all out, but we have to take a look at them again in context of developing and creating a multicultural, egalitarian culture. We have to think about our notions of success, because you're right, it is basically rugged individualism versus community. But I don't think it's that kind of dichotomy. I actually think you have to be a pretty strong individual to be in community. You have to have strong internal muscles, a sort of a belief in yourself in order to engage in a relationship with another person or a group or a family or a community or a society. So I think, you talk about interrupting it. I think what we're doing now and the work we're doing, which is asking the question, who are we to one another? How can we build bridges to each other instead of, cutting them down, instead of severing bridges? How do we build those bridges? I think that's that's the question that needs to get answered.
There's been this implicit and maybe sometimes explicit belief that they're better off holding on to their whiteness than they are, working with people of color, that there's some value in having that status. And there's a whole conversation to have around the social constructs of status and how our brain, works to protect that, even though it's a perception as opposed to a reality. But that, in some ways they've chosen status over their own ability to survive and increasing the likelihood of their own survival. And there's actually data from the 2016 vote that white America voted for Trump to maintain their status in the country, more so than over, the economic concerns that were the things that they said they voted for Trump over.
Yeah, and and I think it's the deal that white people made when they accepted slavery as a way of exploiting labor. They made the deal: if you allow us to do this, don't let your conscience get involved. We will work these people for free, and we can all get wealthy. But it didn't. They betrayed the working class guy. The elite got wealthy, but they didn't. But they still had this notion: well, if I'm white, maybe I can get there. Black folks will never get there. But if I'm white, maybe I can be a Rockefeller or somebody like that.
I do think that, so in organizational behavior, we talk about social rewards sometimes being as valuable or more valuable than financial rewards. And so the social reward of being white, right, and having more status over Black people historically, there may be, whether people know it or not or realize it or not, there may be real value in that to them that they're not willing to let go. And they don't realize that they're holding on to something that actually isn't actually helping them.
Right. Yeah, and I do think that white people have internalized this notion of privilege and the goodies that privilege brings to them, and they're not willing to give it up. And quite frankly, if I put myself in that situation, well, if I was experiencing a lot of wealth and comfort and privilege and status in this country, maybe I wouldn't want to give it up either. I mean, maybe it's what you say, Michael. It's, you know, it's maybe part of what the brain tells us. It's certainly what white people have internalized. I get that struggle. I do. I get that. I want to do. Maybe one of the features in a racialized society of that rugged individualism is basically you care about yourself first. So it's just like rampant self-interest. But if you're the low person on the totem pole, we don't even recognize that you have any rights at all that we need to worry about.
You gotta find a way to live your life. You gotta find a way to forgive each other. You gotta find a way to find joy in your existence in spite of that feeling.
Again, the question being, who are we to one another? And our answer is everybody as our own.